Welcome to the Autism Alliance of Michigan Skill Building Series. AAOM is guided by the vision that people with autism will lead lives to their greatest potential. The mission of AAOM is to lead efforts to raise expectations and expand opportunities for people touched by autism across the lifespan. My name is Tamako Teshima, and I am a speech-language pathology consultant for AAOM. Our webinar today is about social narratives, what they are, and how to use them. There's also a handout to help guide your thinking as we have this discussion today. Imagine that you're going on a vacation. You know you're going somewhere, but you're going somewhere you've never been before, and you don't know much about it. You know when you're going, but you're not sure how to pack because you've never been to this place. You're not sure what the accommodations will be like or even what to expect. How does that make you feel? It would make me feel pretty anxious. For our children on the autism spectrum, new and unfamiliar events might feel exactly like this. This is especially so for children who very much like routine and have difficulty with flexibility. The reality is, though, that life is going to throw us scenarios and situations that are new and unexpected. Social narratives, our topic for today, can help children prepare for these events. Social narratives are stories that help individuals with autism understand social situations, expectations, social cues, new activities, and/or social rules. These stories provide factual information and heavy emphasis on the factual that helps teach and prepare the individual for a new experience. Out in your searches or your research, you may have come across the term social story. And the trademarked social story came from Carol Gray, who is the pioneer of social stories. And this came around in 1991. Fun fact, Carol Gray is actually from Jenison, Michigan. The strict guidelines of how to make a true social story are outlined by 10 defining criteria. So for the purposes of this seminar, we will be discussing how to use the methods taught by Carol Gray to make our own social narratives that may or may not fit the 10 strict guidelines of a social story. That doesn't mean that they're not effective. They can be equally as effective in helping our children prepare for new and unexpected circumstances. So who is appropriate for a social narrative? Today we're going to focus primarily on children with autism spectrum disorder, but really a lot of different individuals would benefit from a social narrative. Anxious kids or worriers might benefit from having a social narrative in situations where things might be new or unusual to help alleviate a little bit of that anxiety. Individuals with difficulty handling change or disruptions to routine or transition would also benefit greatly from a social narrative. But at the end of the day, really anybody could benefit from one. I've used social narratives with a variety of children on my caseload. I've used it with children who stutter, for instance, or I've used it with language impairment kiddos who are transitioning to the next grade. Any child who is going to be put into a new or unusual situation would benefit from this. But primarily, we're going to speak about today children who are on the autism spectrum. So what does a social narrative look like? Well, there are 4 main factors that go into writing a social narrative. The first and most important is that it must be written from the reader's perspective. So we're talking about using I and me pronouns. We know that people with autism spectrum disorder often have difficulty taking the perspective of others. So by writing it from the perspective of the reader or the person with autism spectrum disorder, it makes it easier to understand. The second factor is that the statements must be factual. There should be no judgmental language in this social narrative. All statements must be 100% fact. Third, the topic must be relevant to the reader. So you can write a social narrative about flying on an airplane, and it could fit all of this criteria. But if the person reading the story is not going on an airplane, then it wouldn't really be relevant. You want to make sure that whatever the topic of the story is matches with something that is going on in that person's life. Finally, a social narrative must be written with text and pictures. Pictures might not necessarily be needed, especially for children who are readers, but they do add extra support for understanding. Real life pictures are preferred over cartoon or drawn pictures, but use whatever you are comfortable with. When it comes to the text of a social story, there are 4 types of sentences that should be used. The first is a descriptive sentence. These are sentences that are truthful, opinion-free statements of fact. These need to be as accurate as possible. These identify the most relevant factors in the situation, answer the WH questions: who, what, when, where. And this forms the backbone of the social narrative. So some examples would be something like, my name is Tamako Teshima. Sometimes my grandma reads to me. Many children play on the playground. So if we look at the slide, we can see 2 examples. Airplanes fly in the sky. There will be other people on the airplane with me. That is a descriptive sentence. Those are facts. Versus airplanes are a scary way to travel. That's an opinion. Maybe it's scary to you, but it might not be to me. So the descriptive sentences need to be factual. The next type of sentence is called a perspective sentence, and this gives us insight as to a person's internal state, their feelings, or their opinions. So when we talk about perspective sentences, we focus on a couple of different things. Obviously, feelings, like was just mentioned. We can also talk about internal motivation or why people do things. Physical or health conditions can also come up in these sentences, as well as the beliefs of other people. These still need to be factual, and they always need to be framed in a positive way. So let's take a look at an example. My teacher knows about science. It's a fact, and it lets us know what's going on in the teacher's brain. What wouldn't be a perspective sentence is, my teacher is the best at science and knows more than I do. Well, we have a couple of issues there. One, it's not a fact. We don't know that the teacher is the best at science. And 2, we're kind of getting out of the positive and getting into a negative when we say, and knows more than I do. So we want to make sure that we're talking about the internal state of others while maintaining fact and also framing it in a positive way. Directive sentences are suggested responses or choices to be made. They answer the question, when I'm in this situation, how should I respond? These help to direct the behavior of the person reading the story. When writing these, make sure to leave room for error because we're not perfect. Nobody's perfect. And we would never expect our children to be perfect every single time. So framing things like, I will try to work on blank, or I may try to blank is a great way to do it. So I will try to work on my math, or I may try to ask for help before I become upset. This leaves room for error. Let's take a look over at the examples on the slide. So, for example, when I am stuck, I can ask my mom for help. Gives a scenario and what to do when you're in that scenario. Versus something like, when I'm stuck, mom will help me. That doesn't direct the behavior of the person, that directs the behavior of mom. We don't want that. So make sure it always answers the question, what do I do when I'm in a certain situation? The last type of sentence is called an affirmative sentence. This enhances the meaning of what was previously said. It generally expresses a common shared value or stresses an important point or reassures the person reading the story. It typically follows one of the other 3 sentences. So let's take a look at the example on the slide. One friend goes down the slide at a time. That's a descriptive sentence. This is a safe thing to do is an affirmative sentence because it enhances the meaning of the first sentence. I may have to wait in a line for a long time. That's a descriptive sentence. This is okay. That's an affirmative sentence, giving the person some reassurance. So when we're looking at the format of a social narrative, we want to have 2 to 5 descriptive, perspective, or affirmative sentences for every 1 directive sentences. Remember that descriptive sentences really make up the backbone of the story, so we want to have more of them than a directive. If we're heavy on the directive sentences, all we're really doing is just giving them a series of things we want them to do without any perspective. So by having this ratio, you are laying down the foundation of what to expect while also helping to direct some behavior. Let's take a look at a social narrative written by AAOM in their My Navigator newsletter. This was written for a child who is scared of wearing a mask and is uncomfortable wearing a mask during COVID-19. When I go to the store, I see people shopping with masks on. Descriptive sentence. They are wearing masks to help stop the spread of COVID-19. Descriptive sentence. COVID-19 is an illness that can make people very sick. Descriptive sentence. Wearing a mask can help protect people from getting COVID-19. Descriptive. I do not like seeing people wearing masks. Perspective. It makes me feel scared. Perspective. I do not like the feeling of a mask on my face. Perspective. It is uncomfortable. Perspective. I will practice wearing my mask for a few minutes each day. Directive. The more I practice wearing a mask, the easier it will be to wear. Directive. I can practice taking deep breaths before I put my face mask on, and this will help me feel relaxed. Directive. So the ratio was met during this social narrative. As you saw, there were 2 to 5 descriptive sentences or perspective or affirmative sentences for every 1 directive sentence. So how do you get started on a social narrative? If you want to write one for somebody in your life, what are the steps you need to take? The first step is to think of a goal. What is a new or unexpected event or a situation that the individual might need to be prepared for? Get that into your head and then proceed to step 2. Gather all of the information you might need about that. Think about where it might happen, when it might happen, who is involved, how the events are sequenced. You also might want to think about the reading styles or the learning styles or the ability levels of the person who is going to read this story. You're going to want to pay close attention to that because that will determine how you phrase things or the vocabulary you use. You want to make sure that you're writing for the audience that's going to read it. The next step is to individualize the writing. So in the mask story that we just read, that was written very specifically for a child who did not like wearing masks, who was very scared of them. So that might not apply to the person that you're writing your social narrative for. If you were writing one about masks, maybe the individual doesn't like wearing it because it itches their face. So then you would tailor the text to that individual. So you want to make sure that it really addresses the particular pieces of information that are relevant to the person. The next step, if you're going to use them, is to collect pictures. I always like to use real pictures rather than cartoons if possible. Just click a little picture on your smartphone, upload it into the story, and print it. It's as easy as that. The last step is to read it and read it over and over again. Where can you find them? Well, one place I often go to is PBIS World. They have a lot of different social narratives on that website. But AAOM also has community social narratives that are tailored to places in the state of Michigan, specifically on the east side. So you might want to check those out. For additional information, questions, and resources, please contact the Autism Alliance of Michigan. AAOM is prepared at no cost to counsel, advocate, and connect families to evidence-based care and support, however long it takes. Our navigation program will connect you or anyone touched by autism to a free lifelong guide with professional help and answers. Thank you so much for attending this webinar, and have a wonderful day.